Recently, I've been having to think about Final Fantasy 15. It's been bugging me for a long time, and I'd really just want to get these thoughts and feelings off my chest. This isn't a review or a proper analysis, more of a therapy session, and you lot are my therapists, so strap on your big Freud pants and let's get ranting. This is I Rant About Final Fantasy 15 for 15 minutes. So let's start off with the story, and I'm going to be talking about the story a lot. The story is complete dog shit. It is tired, boring, predictable, self-sacrifice to save the world from a villain who is villainous for villainous reasons. The story focuses mainly on the prince of all emos, Noctis, and his lovable band of backup dancers. In fairness, their characters and how they interact with each other is actually the best part of the game. It makes sense why they are together, and you feel like it's natural, rather than, say, in Octopath Traveler, where two characters just go, shall we team up? And they're like, yeah, okay. Noctis is on his way to marry Lunafreya, whose name I keep forgetting, which I'll explain why later. And so, the ragtag group of anime dream boys are off on a road trip. So who is Lunafreya? Fuck knows. If you watch the spin-off anime, you might learn a little bit more, maybe? There are some flashbacks from when they were kids which don't provide any reasonable explanation, but sometimes raises even further questions. There's this one flashback that stood out where Noctis is in a wheelchair and absolutely no explanation for it. I can't tell if he was wheelchair bound for a portion of his life or if he's fucking around on Lunafreya's, in which case, why was she wheelchair bound for a portion of her life? This is the start of my problem with Final Fantasy 15. We are barely 20 to 30 minutes into the game. The story is far too fragmented and is painfully obvious they filled in the gaps after finishing the game. Partway through, one of your sexier teammates, Gladdy Daddy, turns around and says, "Aye, that's me off, see you in a bit." And he just fucks off for an unspecified amount of time. He later comes back and everyone carries on like nothing. Yeah, alright, cool, no one's gonna question what the actual fuck is going on. Where have you been? Another partway through the game, the smart one goes blind off screen, and then, in a dramatic moment, the villainous villain declares his real name, which means absolutely fucking nothing unless you've been reading random magazines dotted around the world. Final Fantasy 15's story is a complete mess. Everything I've complained about so far has either been explained, hand-waved, or straight up hidden from players unless you have paid money for the DLC, watched the anime, or the movie spin-off, or played the spin-off game King's Quest or something. As someone who has played through the entire base game before any of the updates, this was an absolutely appalling way of telling a compelling story. I don't have the time nor the money to go hunting for extra content just so the story presented in the fucking game makes sense. The biggest gripe I have with the story is what happens with Lunafreya. I had no idea that Noctis actually likes her. You have more interaction with the time-travelling dog than you do with her. And even the options you are presented with for writing letters to her range from cold to colder. I honestly thought, since I had no previous knowledge on either of these dipshits, that this was an arranged marriage. Then after hours of hunting tomatoes or riding on chocobos, you finally meet her and they kill her off. Just instantly. I get the feeling they were trying to recapture that moment in Final Fantasy VII when Aerith died. But let's compare the two. In Final Fantasy VII, the very first person you see when starting a new game is Aerith. Cloud meets her before she formally joins the party. You can talk to her, you can give her equipment, and most importantly, she has a level 4 limit break. When you get to the end of Disc 2, you are most likely to have a level 2 limit break, or maybe level 3, if you've been grinding it particularly hard. You have this impression that Aerith is a permanent member of your party. And then they kill her. This is shocking to the player. You see Cloud going through actual genuine grief over this. Now let's compare that to Lunafreya. Noctis and Luna only meet once, and they barely talk. She gives a speech, Noctis has a little bit of a cry, then Discount Kefka shanks her. Keep in mind, we know next to nothing about this character. I had grown more attached to the Chocobo Ranch girl by this point. The majority of their relationship is explained after she has already died. Imagine if Aerith died right at the beginning of Final Fantasy VII. Just that first bit where she's looking into the green water and then whack! Impaled. Why is impaled a whack? The rest of the game is you playing catch-up to her background. Just because the wrong but canonical love interest died doesn't automatically make it sad and impactful. There's this one part near the end where you're on a train, you're literally on rails, and you stop off at this beautiful, magnificent castle where Luna Freya lived. I'm getting some really hardcore Final Fantasy VIII Ultimecia's castle vibes from it. Alright, sweet. Maybe we can explore and learn a bit more about her past. Maybe her death released some magic what's-it and we have to help her soul lay to rest or something. No. A maid sat outside the beautiful castle, talks to you for 10 minutes, and then you fuck right back onto the train, never to see this place again. What the actual fuck, Final Fantasy 15? How many nights did these developers toil away at this magnificent building, skipping family time and eating instant noodles just to make this magical experience for the gamers, and then it gets completely scrapped? Fuck you, Nomura, you zipper-loving pillock. So yeah, the story is fragmented, poorly written, poorly executed trollop. So how does it play? Alright. Just alright. The gameplay is a first for a mainline Final Fantasy game, where it's all real-time. But this feels more like a different game skinned with Final Fantasy elements rather than an actual Final Fantasy game. In the overworld, you drive around in this stupid car. You have bare minimum control over it, and for all intents and purposes, it's just on rails. You choose a destination, Specky drives you there. If you gain the privilege to drive, you can maybe steer slightly left and right. You have the typical MMORPG style side quests of fetching or killing X amount of things in exchange for other things. In combat, playing as Noctis is alright really. His teleport spear is handy, his other weapons are also there. But what's a Final Fantasy game without magic? Final Fantasy 15. A Final Fantasy game without magic is Final Fantasy 15. Magic is reduced to grenades. You can go around the world sucking up elemental energy from these rocks or something, and then you craft them into elemental grenades. Already I am horribly disappointed that I have to do this. But there's just one slight itty-bitty problem. You have no control over your backup dancers. And these magic grenades do friendly damage. So you can only throw these fucking things right at the very start of a fight and hope no one is stupid enough to run headfirst into the aftermath prompto, you fucking pillock. But what about the summons? What about the summons? Summons only work when the game feels like it. There are certain story boss fights where they are guaranteed to work, and apparently they do work sometimes in regular battles if certain conditions are met, but in my playthrough I never saw it. So team-based strategy is nerfed, magic is nerfed, summons are double nerfed. The only real means of fighting is to teleport close, give the enemy a real gentle slap, and then teleport away. Rinse and repeat. Here's something I learned the hard way. When I played Final Fantasy 15, my kid was still a baby, and one night she woke up when I was in the middle of a boss fight. So I brought up the item menu with the trigger button and went to attend to her, because pressing the trigger button is easier than pressing the pause button. Sorry. Options button. Thanks, Sony. When I came back into the room, I was looking at a game over screen. The item menu pauses the game, but nothing indicates that this is timed. I lost a good chunk of time to this little bit of idiocy. The last portion of this game has stealth. I'm not joking. Throughout the entire game, you have been a 3 to 4 member party with weapons and magic and summons sometimes. This is completely thrown out the window in favor of a ring that slowly insta-kills certain enemies if they spot you. It's so bad. After some boring story, you have to time jump to the apocalypse. None of the lads stuck with each other whilst you had a nap in a crystal or something. You get new clothes, which I think are the third and last set of clothes you can change into in the entire game. You go back to your hometown, which is now crawling with monsters, but I really just don't care. I see the city in the background for like 10 seconds whilst Noctis is snarky with his dad at the beginning of the game. So I don't really get that feel of dread with my hometown in ruins like in most other RPGs. Let's see, if Ifrit does some parkour, you do this boring Matrix Revolutions fight with what's-his-name, and then you stab yourself on the throne. The end. I know I keep going back to the story and how much I hate it, but I just want to emphasize just how emotionally uninvested I was. For every awesome looking set piece it provided, it gives me 4 reasons why I shouldn't care. It's just so utterly disappointing. There's so much potential with Final Fantasy 15. You know what? Let's try and fix it. This is Tamachan87's quick and dirty rewrite of Final Fantasy 15. Okay, let's see. You start off in your city as a child. You go to school with your buddy Prompto, but the local bully picks on him. You step in for a tutorial fight with wooden sticks. Win or lose after the fight, Lunafreya tends to your wounds with the healing magic. You share a moment and agree to meet up that night in a park. After school, Gladdy Daddy beats the shit out of you for fighting, held back by Iggy Stardust. So you run away into the city. Here you can explore the city and have some side quests. It should feel a little bit like the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 2 now. Eventually, you meet up with Lunafreya, who tells you she's moving away to that big fancy castle. But she gives you Wishbone, the time-traveling mutt, to keep in touch. Time skip to the wedding road trip and take it from there. I wrote that. I wrote all of that in about 10 minutes whilst rocking a baby to sleep. Nomura took 10 fucking years to churn out what we have to slog through today. Is Final Fantasy 15 a bad Final Fantasy game? Yes. Is Final Fantasy 15 a bad game? Not really. Maybe I'm being really hard on it because I was just so disappointed. I didn't really go into it very hyped, considering the disappointment I had with Final Fantasy 10, 12, and 13 before it. But at least their stories were complete. Bonkers, but complete. Final Fantasy 15 feels more like an okay game that had a Final Fantasy skin over the top. Just like that Final Fantasy Spirits Within movie, it really shouldn't be using the Final Fantasy name. Call it its own new series and maybe it would be better? I don't know. I would recommend skipping Final Fantasy 15 and going to play the Final Fantasy 7 remake instead. Unless this video ages horribly and chapters 2 and 3 are utter disasters, in which case just go and play Grandia 2. In fact, just go play Grandia 2 in general. That's a smashing game. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go play Grandia 2 now. Alright, cheers, bye.